When we were young teens, there was in our small town, there was a scandal of a pastor at one of the churches who was abusing little girls and maybe little boys, I don't know. But it was found out and they stopped it and they arrested him. And I remember the week that that happened, we went to church and our pastor, who was obviously friends of the other pastors in this small community, was telling us what happened and how he reacted. And he was describing this scene. Our pastor was just pure gold, nice, kind, gentle person. And he was describing from the pulpit that he had to go and sit in prison and forgive this person. And it had been less than a week since we all found out about this. And that was a pivotal moment in my life because I couldn't wrap my mind around, oh, we just forgave him. That's it. Forgiveness. That's it. Just forgiven. And yeah, he'll go to jail and spend the rest of his life there and never work in the ministry again, obviously. But poof, we've forgiven him. And to this day, I don't have a comfortable feeling in my stomach from that event on about forgiveness.
That reminds me of a story of a time when I was also in ministry and one of my colleagues' daughters got murdered. They gathered everybody in a room, his friends, his colleagues, on the first day of the trial for the person that murdered his daughter. And I was asked to give a few words. I did a scripture reading, and I ended by saying that at some point it would be good for you to work toward forgiveness. That's probably not going to be today. It might not even be this year. And it won't be for the sake of the person who is sitting in that trial right now. It will be because you will not be able to sustain carrying the burden of the anger and the hatred for the rest of your life. And the work of forgiveness is not about absolving the other person of what they did, but it's about letting go of that burden that you carry when you hold on to that resentment.
The modern concept of forgiveness doesn't even really need to involve the person who did the thing. It involves the person who's holding that burden of not forgiving.
I think there's a really big misconception about forgiveness in our culture. On social media, I've heard a ton of conversation around how the people on the left are never going to forgive MAGA for the abuses that they're seeing happening in our country right now. And I think that culturally, the concept of forgiveness includes this element that you are absolving the other person. I think that's the misconception. I think that's part of the reason why everybody is so adamant that they're never going to forgive, because they don't see people doing the work and they don't want to let them off the hook for what they've done. Forgiveness is not the same thing as withholding accountability.
How does one truly forgive someone else without holding them accountable? I think that's where the difficulty comes in, because I can forgive, anything and still want retribution, still want accountability, still want punishment. So how do we separate those two concepts?
My definition of forgiveness is when you know and acknowledge that the scales of justice are imbalanced and that they will never be in balance, but that at the same time you are willing to let go of the burden of carrying that. And so the concept of accountability and the concept of forgiveness are mutually exclusive. You do not have to have accountability in order to let go of that burden. But I do also think that there is a huge piece of accountability that have other consequences. If someone in your family does something egregious to you, and the consequence is that you cut them out of your life because they're not healthy for you anymore, and down the road you forgive them, which means you let go of the burden of being angry with them, doesn't necessarily mean that you eliminate the consequences of the behavior. So you can forgive them and still cut them out of your life. That's accountability. The forgiveness piece is letting it off your own shoulders, but the accountability piece is that there still are consequences for the things that people do. So even though I was asking for my friend to forgive the person, it wasn't even about the person. And the accountability is that that person is going to go to prison for the rest of his life.
Well, I think we're really talking about two different concepts here that I think we use interchangeably accidentally, and one of them is forgiveness. And forgiveness is about your internal work. You never even have to say out loud the forgiveness. You don't have to share it with the person who's done the thing. The forgiveness is really internally letting go of that burden of hatred and that feeling of justice not being just, which, by the way, is extraordinarily unsatisfying. But that's what it is. And then the other piece, which is hopefully the accountability. Let's say the murderer was never caught. There's still a component of forgiveness that can be there. But then the other piece of it, let's term that something. It's not necessarily even accountability, because if the person is never caught or if they've passed as well, how do we satisfy that accountability piece of it? And how to truly separate that? I think we're still very much tied between those two things. So what is that word we're looking for? The justice, the accountability, admission of guilt? I don't know. What is that other piece that we need to completely separate from the act of forgiveness?
I think justice is a pretty close word. And I think accountability is not that far off. I think part of the problem is that people conflate the two, that people conflate the justice accountability piece with the forgiveness piece. And we really kind of do have to separate those two out. There can be forgiveness with accountability, and there can be forgiveness without accountability. If we don't see accountability, we feel like there can be no forgiveness. Because what we're really saying is, without accountability, there's no consequence for your behavior. And therefore, I don't want to let go of the burden of being angry about that. And we're kind of mixing them all up. And I really think they do kind of have to be separated.
I want to double down on what you just said. And that is, for me, that's the key. And that is that forgiveness is not absolving the other person of accountability or responsibility or guilt or anything, really nothing. It doesn't even have to do with the other person. And that to me is the way to free oneself to be able to forgive without the burden of absolving the other person or saying, no, it's okay, you're fine, and without any of that. And that frees us to be forgiving.
Yeah, and forgiveness is saying, the thing you did to me is not okay. It's not okay, and it's never going to be okay. And at the same time, I can move past what holding on to that does to me.
So let's talk about that. There is a seething anger that could be part of that, a continual focus on seeking justice when justice might not ever be there. What are the other pieces of not forgiving that eat us up?
They're not forgiving. The refusal to move past the anger and the hatred eats us up. It physically hurts our bodies. Our bodies carry all of that angst and anger and the negativity. Our bodies carry that. It is not good for our health, for our physical health to carry that. It's not good for our spiritual health. It's not good for our financial health. I mean, in all ways, hanging on to that is going to harm us. And that's what the forgiveness is about.
Not forgiving could keep us in this circle of focus on that wrong. And I think it's very, very difficult to move past some things, because there is this sense of saying that it's okay. That's not it at all. That this moving past it and moving on with life, even with that damage done in your life, and that's part of the quilt of your existence, so to speak. But moving past it, not being sort of this whirlpool of I will forever be focused and feeling the pain of that wrongdoing and never able to do other things with my life that are important too, with the knowledge that that happened and that is part of who you are.
Let's talk about that place that we get into when we're not yet ready to forgive. I think one of the things that really keeps us stuck in that place of I will never forgive you is that we want to have someone to blame, and we want to make sure that that injustice is balanced, that that accountability is had. And a lot of times I think our own unwillingness to move past that is because we tie so closely wanting to get back at the person who did it. And I feel like the hardest ones to forgive are the ones where there isn't accountability. And so how do we sit in that place where we know that the justice is not being served, like you said, if a person is not caught for their crime? Or what I also find equally disruptive is when people are caught and they don't care. or there aren't consequences, or they're rewarded for their bad behavior. Those get me just as much because I want somebody to pay for it. I want justice. I want it equal. I want you to pay. And I think on some levels, I feel like if I see you pay, it'll make me feel better. It doesn't work like
So,
that,
as
unfortunately.
much as I would love to be just chatting with my sister and have no vulnerability, I'm thinking now to people who I haven't forgiven yet. And I'm not a good forgiver. I'm not. I'm not a grudge keeper, but I'm not really good at forgiving. So let me think back to one person who hurt me, not with a crime, but hurt me deeply, deeply for a long period of time. And I've not forgiven. And I wonder if I'm stuck in that wanting some sort of consequence for that person before I'm able to forgive. And that's me tying together accountability and forgiveness. And I wonder right now, I'm not ready to forgive, but I'm wondering, what would it feel like if I actually did just forgive the hurt and forget about the consequence and the accountability and the justice that I want so badly, right?
Okay, so first let's just put this out there that if a person is not ready to forgive, it is okay to be in that space too. What you were describing in the very first conversation that you had, the story that you told about the pastors, I think what sat wrong with us was that it was too soon and there wasn't really accountability. I mean, and we kind of could see like, yeah, there was going to be a trial happening, but you have to go through a process before you get to forgiveness. And a lot of times, and particularly in the church, I found this a lot. People who grew up in the church want to just jump so fast to forgiveness that you skip over the process. And then what you end up with is not real. It's not genuine. It's not a genuine, true letting go of the burden. What it is a shoving down of the emotion that you're feeling. It's a shoving down of that desire to have that justice. It's not true forgiveness because forgiveness takes time and it takes effort. It really kind of does take like a lot of the internal work. And as much as I wish that forgiveness would feel natural if there are consequences, it's just not how that works.
I think there's another piece to it as well. But first, I want to call out that the story of when we were kids and that pastor had gotten arrested. Yes, it was too soon because none of us had gone through any kind of process. But I think it's regardless of the trial, the accountability, the arrest, all of that had to be separated. It was the forgiveness that we had, the process we had to go through. And then you mentioned too that forgiving really quickly could just be a way to shove down the emotions. And I think that's one way that forgiveness could be avoided. The other way forgiveness could be avoided is that the anger sometimes is a really comfortable place to be. And right now, this anger I have, I don't really want to give it up. It's comfortable. It's my teddy bear. It's my worn away blanket. And I'm comfortable with that anger.
Okay.
So I would love to get rid of it, but I also would love to keep it.
You know what? I think having grown up in the church, we're not given any space to just be okay with hanging on to that anger.
I don't want to be.
So I want to
I
just
don't want
give
to
you
be
this
okay with
just
that.
for a moment. For now, though, like between now and the time we're finished with our recording, you can still be angry, right? Like it's okay.
Thank you for that.
It's okay to have that anger. And here's the other piece of it that I think we really never talk about. Forgiveness is not an event. Please like and subscribe and comment. We would love to hear what you think that we should be talking about. Forgiveness is not an event. It's not something you work up toward and then once you've thought it or said it, it's done. It is a continual process and it's cyclical. So as we're moving toward forgiveness, as we're moving toward trying to let go of the anger and the hurt, we might find that there are days when we're moving closer to what we might consider forgiveness, which is letting go of that. And then there might be days we slingshot right back. And I don't think that we ever consider that. And I think especially growing up in the church, the forgiveness concept was a thing you do. And once the thing is done, then the other person is absolved in a sense, you know, like, and that's between God and them now. But But
We're still
what
involved.
about the hurt, and what about the anger, and what about the times when I feel like I've moved past it and then it hits me again? So I think that's a really critical piece too that we really never talk about. Forgiveness is not an event. It's a process, and it's a back and forth process. It's making progress and then backing off.
So it's very interesting to me how you and I, being raised in a church, our view of forgiveness was shaped by that. So in church, we sought forgiveness as an event through communion, and forgiveness in general was an event in the Bible. So, I mean, it was definition from the Bible, and that really made it look like an event that, God forgives quickly and through repentance or whatever. So I think that really has shaped my view of forgiveness. And the way you describe it right now, as sometimes I'll feel a little more forgiving and then sometimes I'll feel a little bit more angry for a while, for years, if not forever.
Years.
It seems to me a much more achievable end goal of forgiveness. If this is not something that I have to say, okay, by Wednesday at 9, I need to forgive. That's not possible.
Yeah. And we've even been through exercises where you like write down the thing on the piece of paper and then you burn it. And that's an event, and it's intended to make you feel as if the thing is behind you now. That doesn't give you any permission or space then tomorrow when you're still mad about it, and then you go like, well, what did I do yesterday? Like, there's not any conversation around that. There's no language about that. When you think of forgiveness as that event, that one thing that you have to do, and as soon as you do it, and as soon as you write it on paper and it burns, it's out in the universe now you're over it, and now they can also go on with their lives and pretend that it didn't affect you anymore because you've forgiven them. That's not at all, I think, a healthy way of looking at forgiveness. And I don't even think, I don't want to make this earlier a religious conversation, but I really don't even think that that's what Jesus meant, or any of the religious leaders when they're talking about forgiveness. I don't think any of them were all talking about an event. I think we just interpreted it that way because it's neater. It's cleaner to tie it all in a little bow and put it out and burn it up into the air, and then it's done. And we don't live very comfortably with things that are hanging out there. And that anger that we keep coming back to when we're in the process of forgiving feels like it's always hanging out there, and we don't want that.
I want to reiterate the religious construct of forgiveness as an event: confession, communion.
Yes.
Go talk to your neighbor before the sun sets. They're all very, very strict events. And so I feel like, at least on the surface, the religious construct of forgiveness is an event. If we look at the more secular version or the more mental health version of forgiveness, that speaks to me as more of a journey and more of a, sometimes you're going to feel better about it and sometimes you're not.
With the confession, we grew up Lutheran, so confessions weren't done in a confessional with a priest. It was done communally, weekly, where we confess our sins before God and others, and then we get a forgiveness proclaimed upon us. But there's also this sense of, but I also have to acknowledge my sin. I have to do better. I have to not ever commit that same exact sin ever again because I've already, been absolved of it. So I better not mess that one up again. In the Catholic Church, you've got to say the Hail Marys, the Our Fathers. I think there's this misconception that we have more control over it than we do. And I think that this exchange, this transaction of, if I'm guilty of a sin and I want to be forgiven for it, all I have to do is X amount of consequences that are hopefully not too unpleasant. And then once that forgiveness is given to me, then I'm absolved of it all. I no longer need to expect that the other person is angry with me. It's very transactional.
Yes, I felt it transactional when I was a kid. I actually brought to the church one day the question, how do I approach communion or approach asking God for forgiveness when I know I'm going to commit that sin again? I plan to. I'm going to do it again, right? And I didn't get a good answer. I think it was, oh, well, you got to try harder to not. But I knew I was going to. Some of these sins were just being human. So I knew I was going to again. And I didn't get a good answer, but I think it was because it was viewed as a transaction.
I think that's one of the reasons why when we are trying to do the journey of forgiving other people, why we want to have them be held accountable, because we haven't seen that transaction done. And we were raised that the transaction is part of the process. And if you don't have that transaction, if you don't have that consequence, then you haven't earned the privilege of forgiveness.
This is brilliant. I'm just occurring to me right now. This is brilliant. This reason that we attach forgiveness to accountability is because of the transactionality of forgiveness as a religious construct.
Damn.
So how do we go on that journey?
I want to take it one step further. Not only is it a problem of a religious construct, but it is also a misogynistic construct.
Well, I knew we were going there. It's been 20 minutes. We haven't talked about misogyny.
We knew we'd go there. When women were married to men and had no way of making a living, of sustaining themselves, of having a checking account or being able to buy a house, when women did not have that as an option, forgiveness was a way to keep women enslaved to abusive husbands. And you will never convince me that the church didn't use the concept of forgiveness to excuse men from beating the shit out of their wives and put the burden of fixing that on the woman. And so when a woman would come in and my husband's beating the shit out of me, you must forgive him, was a way to keep women enslaved to abusive relationships.
So the idea of a woman not being able to own property, have a bank account, earn money at a job the same way that a man did, not that way back, but way back when, it also fed into this idea of the no-fault divorce, which was first introduced in 1970. So that's in my lifetime. Before that, women had to forgive, or that's it. There was no option. You forgive or you just be angry every single day. So this idea of you have to forgive, you have no other option. It's not even that you have to forgive, you have to just put up with. And that's not the same thing as forgiving. But you have to put up with, and that's not a great situation.
But also the transactional nature of forgiving a husband that's going to do that to you again and again and again means that every time you offer them forgiveness, they start with a clean slate.
Right.
And so the next time it happens, it just happened just the one time, according to the laws of the balance of justice in the universe. And then you forgive them and they go back to a clean slate again. There's never going to be accountability if they get to have the clean slate over and over and over and over and over again. And that's what forgiveness was at that time.
So let's talk about a mentally healthy journey toward forgiveness. What are the steps that one has to take toward the forgiveness that doesn't involve their accountability? The forgiveness that frees us, not the perpetrator.
I think you just named it. The very first step that we have to do is accept the reality that we will never have consequences that satisfy the anger and the hurt. We first have to just accept that as a reality, because we'll never be able to move past it if we're continuing to think that there's going to be some kind of consequence. And it's totally human nature. That is a process. Let me tell you what. So I have a lot of hurt and anger towards certain people in my life. And I am still waiting for some of those people to recognize what they did and say to me, oh my God, I can't believe. Now I see it. Now I see it. I'm seeing the light. Now I see what I've done to you. And I'm so, so sorry. Will you ever forgive me? And that is probably going to happen. And so I will never move to forgiveness if I don't first accept that the forgiveness is my journey and it's not about their consequence.
So there are two interesting pieces there. One, you're not going to be asked for forgiveness by a lot of people who don't find what they did to be damaging. They don't see it. They don't see you. They don't care. You're not going to be asked for forgiveness. The second piece of it is that even if you could get that retribution, that I hope this happens to that person, I would love to see this happen to that person. Even if that happened to that person, it wouldn't be satisfying. It wouldn't be. As much as I wish that, as much as we have that, if it happened, it wouldn't, there's no satisfaction in that without the forgiveness.
I think that there is a momentary satisfaction, but it's not sustainable.
I don't think so. I think it's pettiness and some sort of, baser instinct, but I don't think it's satisfaction.
I would say there is a reaction that feels like satisfaction, but you're right. It doesn't satisfy. It doesn't actually fill that hole. Like in the moment you could think,
Huh.
okay, yeah, yes,
There's
please.
justice. On that way to forgiveness, we have to completely let go of that wanting something bad to happen. We have to let go of that.
Okay, well, let's make that the second thing that has to happen then. So the first thing, we have to accept the reality that we're never going to get that consequence equal to the pain we're feeling. And then the second thing is what you just
And
said.
the third thing is they're never going to ask for forgiveness. We don't need them to ask for forgiveness in order to give the forgiveness. In fact, I think in a lot of cases with a narcissist or someone who is trying to play us, that asking for forgiveness could be manipulation.
Oh, it totally would be.
So I think that piece, we need to remove
Yeah.
that from the road to forgiveness.
So one of the things that I did when I was working my way towards really, really letting go of a particular pain and hurt that I had, I actually did write out all of the things that they did to me that hurt me. And I didn't burn it and then it was gone. But I
If
wrote it
only.
down. I got it out of my system. And then I also wrote down their perspective that I wished that I could have. I wrote down on piece of paper the the asking for forgiveness that I felt like I deserved and knew I was never going to get. And once I had those on paper, I kind of felt like, okay, that was a step for me in the journey of acceptance. Like, I put it on paper, that's me acknowledging I'm never going to get that in real life. Only on paper. This is the only place I'm going to get it. That was, for me, was the acceptance piece. And then I was able to start to focus more of my attention and energy on the life I wanted rather than on the life I felt like they took from me. And once I started focusing less on them and more on myself, that's really when the forgiveness journey started to kind of move me out of that place of hurt and anger, where I could think about the things without feeling that despair.
This is very interesting. You wrote down, which I think is a great exercise, just in general, writing down helps us to formulate thoughts and tease apart ideas. Writing down the wrongdoings, the things that hurt you, and then you wrote down what you wished their perspective was on what happened. Did you ever go back and write down what you think they actually thought? Like what was their real perspective on doing the damage to you?
That's a really interesting question. I didn't write that down, but I did spend a lot of time trying to tease out what was their motivation. And I don't think that ultimately that was a useful tool towards forgiveness. I will say it was an incredibly useful tool towards setting up my own boundaries so that I never let that happen again. The forgiveness was a separate piece, though. Understanding why they did what they did was just a way to protect myself.
How closely tied are forgiveness and establishing boundaries for the future?
Interesting. I think that if you're doing the full journey and the full work of moving towards a forgiveness journey, I think setting the boundaries is a critical piece of that. I don't see how you can get to a place where you can say, yes, I have forgiven that. And it be a place, like it's not an event. It may not be a place where we can get to.
I feel like I'm better at maintaining my boundaries than I am at forgiveness. And that seems like a juxtaposition to me, but that's the way I am. I won't let you do this to me again, but I'm still mad that you did it the first time. Yeah, I guess it doesn't have to be in order that I forgive and then maintain those boundaries. In fact, it probably is healthy on this road to forgiveness that I've established and maintained these boundaries.
Maybe that's ultimately one of the takeaways that we can take from the forgiveness journey, is that if we're doing the internal work that it takes to remove ourselves with distance from the pain and the anger, then we will also be setting healthy boundaries for ourselves to prevent ourselves from being hurt in the future. Although I would say not all hurt and pain is preventable with
I was going to
boundaries.
say we're skirting around us taking accountability for the way people treat us. Right. And I think that's a whole
Yeah.
discussion around boundaries that we could have, but I don't think it's our fault that we were hurt
Not at all. No,
or because we had weak boundaries.
no.
It's not that. So I feel like that's another way that this all gets mixed in together, that I'm unable to forgive. I'm not that good at my boundaries. And therefore I'm the one who's in the wrong.
No, I think the context of the boundaries is that as we do the inner work, we develop boundaries, which does not mean that the hurt was on us.
This discussion is around forgiveness, but I have a question that's popping into my head. Are our boundaries scar tissue?
Yes. Wow, girl. I think that, yeah. Well, yes and no. I think that the boundaries kind of are scar tissue in that that's what comes out of the pain. And at the same time, they are also strength.
Well, scar tissue is very strong,
Never
hard to break through.
Then yeah.
Wow. So I haven't forgiven a single person in the last 50 minutes, but I feel much better.
So let's talk just briefly about what does that look like on the other side of forgiveness. We've talked about that it's not an event, it's not a thing where you can say it's done and I'm over it. And at the same time, there does come a time when the hurt and the pain are not central to our lives. And I would consider that an element of being in that other side of forgiveness. Like on the side of forgiveness where I can think about the events that happened to me or the people that hurt me and not re-experience the same pain and anger that I did. So I guess my question is, how do we define what forgiveness is on the other side?
You mentioned something about reliving that pain. I think there's a not reliving the pain itself just in your everyday life of continually coming back to that, oh, that was awful, that really hurt. Not going back to that every single free moment that you have to when your mind wanders, but also to be able to experience a relatively similar experience without having that pain. So let's just say a significant other has wronged you, to be able to go and have another significant other relationship without continually being afraid of or coming back to that pain of the first significant other. I feel like that is the post-forgiveness, the one of the benefits of post-forgiveness. This is something that's in social media right now, that people are coming out of MAGA and kind of waking up from the MAGA cult, frankly, just be very honest about this. And some are saying that they are welcoming them, please welcome into the critically thinking group. And others are saying, I expected to be a lot more embraced for coming out of this cult. And a lot of people who are not in the cult are very upset with people who knew the truth and voted against all of our best interests anyway. And so there's a sense of, we can't forgive that. We can't forgive that action of repeatedly voting against our best interests and against human kindness and all of the things that we hold very dear.
The reason that it's so hard for me to want to just straight up forgive all of MAGA is because the work that they have to do is going to take a really long time. And so what we're just now seeing is people in the early phases of just opening up their eyes. They're just now coming to some awareness. So we can't expect them right now to be in a place where they have done the internal work. Therefore, we don't have to expect ourselves to have done the internal work either of forgiving them. None of us have had enough time. The wound is still fresh. It's still wide open and there's still salt being poured into those wounds. And so for the people who are doing the work, I love that you're doing the work. And you have to understand that we have work to do too, that forgiveness is a journey and we're not there yet. Most of us that I know are not there yet.
We have to go back to our fundamental premise of this conversation, which is that our forgiveness of other people has nothing to do with their work, right? So
Right.
I think we need to separate that again and say, yes, there's a lot of work that they have to do. Of course, this is something that's ongoing. But the
Yeah.
forgiveness piece, which is our work to say, okay, I understand you've hurt many people that I love and you've damaged our society. So I will be able to forgive that eventually once I've done my internal work. But there's another term, which is not forgiveness, and that is allowing relationship and allowing acceptance into our sort of critically thinking group.
So maybe that allowing for relationship is actually part of the journey that both sides are having to take. So maybe that giving a little bit of space for those people to come into our lives is part of our journey toward forgiveness and part of their journey towards reconciliation, or deconstruction, rather. Maybe the coming together isn't the end goal. Maybe the coming together is just a part of the process. And the end goal is healing and wholeness and unity.
One thing, the forgiveness, independent of MAGAs who come out, who don't come out, the forgiveness is us. It's just us.
Mhm.
And I truly believe that. It doesn't matter if people are assimilated back into society, if they're repentant. It doesn't matter at all for my journey of forgiveness. For coming together as a society, which is also another separate important goal, that's really what we're talking about, is that all sides need to do the work so we can come together and start healing as a society. But to me, that's separate from forgiveness. Kiwi says, if you like this content, please like and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you.